When you hear the word slum, what comes to mind? Urban informality, according to José Castillo, urban planning and design critic at Harvard Graduate School of Design, refers to the practices and forms that a group of stakeholders undertake not only to obtain access to land and housing, but also to satisfy their need to engage in urban life. That was a mouthful. Allow us to break it down for you. In Urbanisms and the Informal, Castillo gives examples of cities that follow the concept of urban informality. Niza and Valle de Chalco are both cities that grew because of the strong connection between the urban planner and the people that live in the city. Although the majority of buildings were self-constructed, that is, built by who would dwell in them, the use of the city planner allowed for a better infrastructural grid that was able to be added onto as more people came to live in these cities.
Nesa grew into a city with almost 1.5 million people, and would be considered a megacity, as outlined by Ananya Roy, professor of city and regional planning at UC Berkeley. In the article Slumdog Cities, she contrasts the megacity, the poster child for the third world, with the global city, which functions as the economic center of the world. Think New York City. The megacity is the slum, the place of the poverty, environmental toxicity, and disease. The example that Roy gives is Mumbai. And yet, with this large amount of misery, this area serves as a large attraction to tourists. What is the appeal of slum tourism? Yes, the megacity isn't a nice place to be, but many have also described it as a place of enterprise, humor, and non-stop activity. The same kind of self-constructed strength that made Nesa so successful, and we use the term successful lightly, is what makes people want to visit the slums of Mumbai. Roy then mentions Slumdog Millionaire, a film that attempts to portray part of the life of an Indian slumdog. She discusses the implication of large enterprises entering local markets and disrupting the existing equilibriums. The film received mixed reactions from various stakeholders, wherein locals who benefited from the making of the film, such as the child actors who were actual residents of the slum and the business owners within the slum, embraced the inflow of publicity and tourism, which thus stimulated economic activity. Conversely, other local parties saw the film as a derogatory representation of the city of Mumbai. This is a good example of how large multinational corporations can have a both positive and negative effect on the context of the developing city such as Mumbai. Let us not forget that films often romanticize a certain aspect of culture for the plot, although we feel that the awareness of slum life raised by Slumdog Millionaire is somewhat valuable.
So, what is the solution to the slum? Roy mentioned subaltern urbanism, a method against apocalyptic and dystopian narratives of the megacity. There is a demographic difference between the total Indian population and all those described as elite. The term subaltern originally had to do with subordinate or lower classes, but now it has become synonymous with popular, making subaltern politics popular politics and subaltern culture popular culture. Say that 10 times fast. She outlines two themes that subaltern urbanism works to change: political agency and the economics of entrepreneurialism, to the problem that arises when the lower class slum dwellers are forced into labor for the rich, and therefore are isolated from the political progression and issues in their own class. The latter has to do with the slum tourism and the interest that people like global architect Ram Koolhaas have in the independence and resourcefulness of the people who live in slums.
Donald McNeill, associate professor at the Urban Research Center at University of Western Sydney, examines the career of Rem Koolhaas in his book, The Global Architect, Firms, Fame, and Urban Form. He addresses that Koolhaas has come to redefining the role of the architect in all the social and technological messiness of the contemporary world economy. Koolhaas has an interest in globalization and the effect of economy on architecture in any given culture. His essay, Junk Space, shows his fascination in this messiness and rapid construction. A perfect example would be the city of Shenzhen in China. The products of buildings in Shenzhen easily surpasses that of America. There is 1/10 the number of architects in China than in the United States, designing 5 times the product volume in 1/5 the time, earning 1/10 the design fee. An albeit very simple example, if there are 10 architects in Shenzhen and 100 architects in the United States, it'll take China 1 month to build 100 buildings for $10, and the United States 5 months to build 20 buildings for $100. All the same size. If you go back to the Ananya Roy reading, you'll see that she includes an excerpt about Koolhaas when discussing economics of entrepreneurialism. She mentions his culture of make-do attitude about slums and his obsession with the ingenious critical alternative systems that he finds there. Perhaps what is most interesting is the conclusion that Koolhaas draws, stating that these cities are not catching up with us, rather we are catching up with these cities.
Ananya Roy, who seems to resent Koolhaas' view of the slum as a mere experiment of his, finds it easy to discount what he has to say about the slums. However, we think there is something valuable there. Those who live in slums have become used to having to work for basic needs that we take for granted, and in that way have probably come to hold those things as valuable. We think that there is something to admire and learn from there, but we wouldn't necessarily go as far and far to say that they have the advantage when they are trying to leave the slums as soon as possible. As far as what Koolhaas has to say in junk space, we think that his interest in the fast production and dirty realism is not unwarranted, and that is something we can learn from the speed and ability of Chinese architects.
Finally, two questions that Roy asks are particularly interesting. The first is there a megacity future for every global city? That inspires the question, is there a global city future for every megacity? We think that both situations are dependent not on time, but on rate of change of economic and/or political growth or decay. As we quote Rem Koolhaas, the past few decades have produced more change in more cultures than any other time in history. We can imagine that it takes a slum a lot of effort to become a place like New York City. We can also see that New York City become a slum in a matter of days, depending on the circumstances. This relates to a second question, which is, what global city can function without the rational dependence on seemingly distant economies of fossil fuels and cheap labor? It almost seems like a seemingly distant economies of fossil fuel and cheap labor refers directly to the megacity, which begs the question, can a global city exist without a megacity? We think that it is a bit far-fetched to attribute the success of a global city to the hardships and tribulations of a megacity. However, we imagine that if a global city were to suddenly lose such sources and connections, the results would be catastrophic. When you hear the word slum, what comes to mind?